late 1700s. The Treaty of Greenville was signed August 3rd, 1795. This was a negotiation from the indigenous people that lost the Battle of Fallen Timbers a year earlier. These tribes were the Whatnot, the Delaware, the Shawnee, the Ottawa, the Chippewa, the Potawatomi, and the Miami Indians. In exchange for goods to the value of $20,000, these indigenous people accepted blankets, utensils, and domestic animals such as dogs and horses. In return, the United States got large portions of Ohio, future sites of downtown Chicago, the Fort Detroit area, and other lands nearby. Treaty of Spring Wells was an agreement between the United States, the Whatnot, the Delaware, the Seneca, the Shawnee, Miami, Chippewa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi Indians, ended a conflict between the United States and these Indians that took part in the War of 1812. The U.S. agreed to restore to the Indians all of their possessions, rights, and privileges as of 1811. In return, the Indians agreed to place themselves under the protection of the U.S. government only.
Basically, both nations wanted an end to this war. The United States possibly more than Britain, because the country was bankrupt by this time.
In many ways, the War of 1812 was America's first Vietnam. Why? Because by 1814, there were student demonstrations in Baltimore, throughout New England. People were disenchanted with the way the government had pursued this war. It was clear that it was not going to be a victory.
The British public was really war weary. They were weary of the conflicts. They wanted people back home. More than anything else, they were weary of the expense of war. The national debt had soared over the years since 1799, and it really was creating a tax nightmare. So for most British people, they wanted an end to this war.
The Treaty of Ghent was Madison's last best hope, in his view, for getting out of a war that was clearly not going well on any level. And the British saw it the same way. The British sent third-rate negotiators. We sent some of our smartest people. As a result, we probably did better at the treaty than we did on the battlefield in most cases.
It'd be fair to say what the United States lost on the battlefield, they gained back at the negotiating table.
Britain.
The British proposer should be an aboriginal barrier state, which would be roughly the western part of what was known as the Old Northwest.
But even if that had been agreed to, that simply would prevent Americans from buying lands from Indians. There would be no a treaty provision there that would prevent Americans from seizing the land in what they claimed was a just war. So I don't think there was any way the Indians were going to halt or roll back westward expansion regardless of the outcome of the War of 1812.
I can't help but think, though, every now and then, did they really mean what they said when they made these treaties? Were they just using us, duping us into, lulling us into complacency with the ultimate goal to take the land?
The Indians never really trusted the British. They pretty much had got the idea right. They knew the British would help them as long as it suited Britain. And they were not there to help the Indians for the sake of the Indians.
The Treaty of Chicago was in the range from 1821 to 1833, which was in the midst of the Black Hawk War as well. For 11 days, the indigenous received free rations from the government, with children, dogs, ponies, and horses, sold huge amounts of whiskey. There were constant war dance, races, and songs. The U.S. government supplied much alcohol to get the indigenous people liquored up and drunk to set up a massive slaughtering because they could not defeat the indigenous people alone. Finally, on September 21st, 1833, in an open shed on the north side of the river, the castle signaled it was ready to talk. Ravaged by epidemics, inheritables by whiskey, threatened by diminished hunting losses, and weakened by firearms, the council acceded. On the next day, September 22nd, the chiefs signed the Treaty of Chicago. For some pay in silver half dollars and most other promise, the indigenous gave 15 million acres, which was transferred to the U.S. government.
French explorers Jacques Marquette and Louis Joliet paddled 40 days up the Mississippi River to the Illinois. They were returning to Quebec from a voyage of discovery, the first white men to descend and map the Mississippi. The French hoped to wrest the continent from the British before they pushed west from their colonies in the east. "We have seen nothing like this river," Marquette wrote of the earthly paradise they encountered west of the Illinois. Marquette was a Catholic missionary. His converts would also make good allies. "There are great prairies," noted Joliet, a geographer, "with grass 5 or 6 feet high." They had discovered the tall grass prairies, an ocean of grass that flowed for 1,000 miles to the Rocky Mountains. They had paddled from the St. Lawrence River over the Great Lakes to what is now Green Bay, Wisconsin. They made an arduous portage up rapids and waterfalls to a continental divide, then descended to the Mississippi. Now, the Indians showed them an easier route back, up the Illinois River, then the Des Plaines, to where it ended in a marshy height of land.
You would never imagine that it was a continental divide of any kind, and yet the marsh was sitting right on the line that flowed both to the Mississippi and into the St. Lawrence. At high water times, in fact, that marsh emptied into both, so that At the highest of waters, you could probably canoe directly from Lake Michigan on into the Mississippi watershed, which is amazing.
Marquette and Joliet reached the divide in September at low water, and they portaged for a few miles, but only a few feet above the marsh. Joliet would recommend to the French in Quebec a canal for canoes that would avoid the portage, a canal that would link the St. Lawrence to the Mississippi. East of the portage was a sluggish river which flowed through a swamp. The Indians called it Chicagua, the place of the wild onion, or skunkweed.
It stunk. It had a foul odor. The river is almost motionless, and this stinking weed gave off this odor that drove even the Indians away. And they're not going to live on a bog. You know, there's plenty of open prairie there and grassland and things like that, and little prairie woodlands. Only the white man's crazy enough to live there.
When the voyagers reached the lake, they began the 1,500-mile trek back to Quebec. Joliet was the first to see the potential of the stinking river at the portage. He would urge the French to return and create a colony. In their war with the British, he knew it could command the continent. The French lost their battle for North America, and for a century, Chicago remained unsettled. A black man arrived around 1780 to farm and trade with the Indians at the mouth of the river. Son of a French father and a Haitian mother, Jean-Baptiste Point de Sable prospered for 20 years. His house had a piano. No one knows why he headed west in 1800. Some say he was disappointed the Indians did not make him a chief. Chicago was a fur trading post out on the Rim, seated in 1825, opened an easy route from New York to the center of the country. The new state of Illinois already envisioned, as Joliet had, a canal that would link the Mississippi to the Great Lakes at Chicago.
This location on Lake Michigan would be one of the endpoints of that canal, thereby linking New Orleans and the Mississippi River with the Great Lakes, the Erie Canal, the Hudson, and New York, so that there would now be a way of delivering all the produce of the interior of North America right into the waiting hands of New York. And Chicago, this location, would be the partner of that New York growth.
The Indians had to go. The Potawatomis were forced to give up 5 million acres they had occupied a century before Marquette and Joliet reached Chicago. U.S. Indian agents plied the chiefs with liquor so they would sign. Traders plied them with liquor to swindle them of their new bounty. On a September evening in 1833, the Indian agents faced west toward the land they would acquire. The chiefs, at least 2 staggering drunk, drew their marks on the treaty papers. The dusky nuisances, as the new landowners considered them, were banished west of the Mississippi. The French and half-breeds followed. The history of Chicago can be written from 1833 forward. An historian would write, as if they had never lived there.